March 8, 1943. Luftwaffe Base Morozovsk, 50 kilometers northwest of Rostov-on-Don. Oberst Friedrich Hartmann stood before a briefing room packed with exhausted pilots, their faces drawn from 6 consecutive nights of disrupted sleep. Outside, mechanics worked under floodlights to repair aircraft damaged not by enemy fighters, but by pilots' own mistakes, flying half-conscious through darkened skies. The previous night alone, Soviet raiders had destroyed 2 ammunition trucks and a fuel depot, each explosion announcing itself at 3-hour intervals throughout the darkness. Hartmann had called this emergency briefing to address what his superiors were calling a morale problem. "Gentlemen, I understand your frustration," Hartmann began, sliding a reconnaissance photograph across the table. It showed a biplane so antiquated it belonged in a museum. But let us maintain perspective. These are women flying crop dusters. Wooden biplanes designed in 1928 to teach farmers' sons how to fly straight. They carry 2 bombs, perhaps 3 on a good night, and must return to reload after each sortie because their pathetic aircraft cannot lift more weight. Laughter rippled through the room. Hauptmann Werner Kessler raised his glass. "To the Nachthexen, may they continue providing entertainment." Another officer chimed in. "My grandfather flew better aircraft in the last war. Perhaps we should send our grandfathers to deal with them." More laughter. Hartmann smiled. "Our Ju-88s possess 3 times their speed, 24 times their horsepower. A child could calculate the outcome. This problem resolves itself through basic physics." What Oberst Hartmann didn't know was that at that precise moment, Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova was 1,500 meters above his airbase, throttling her Polikarpov Po-2 to near silence. The 21-year-old from Donetsk had already completed 218 missions toward what would eventually become 852, making her the most prolific combat pilot of any nation in the Second World War. She and her navigator carried 300 kilograms of fragmentation bombs between them. That night, her regiment would collectively drop 23 tons of ordnance across German positions, a figure Popova herself would contribute to in at least 14 missions. The Germans had destroyed her family home in 1941, killed her brother in the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa. She joined the 588th Night Bomber Regiment not for glory, but for mathematics. Tons of explosives multiplied by missions flown equals some approximation of justice. Within 36 hours, Oberst Hartmann would file a report describing unexplainable damage to reinforced ammunition storage and requesting immediate deployment of dedicated night fighters to his sector. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, represented the culmination of hard-learned lessons written in pilots' blood. After the Battle of Britain revealed that open cockpit night fighters resulted in severe frostbite at altitude, the Luftwaffe mandated fully enclosed heated cockpits. When 73 pilots died in mid-air collisions during the first winter of Operation Barbarossa, radio communication became non-negotiable. Each requirement emerged from specific casualties. Parachutes became standard after reports showed 30% of night fighter losses were preventable if pilots could bail out. Speed minimums of 180 miles per hour were established after multiple Messerschmitt Bf-110s proved too slow to intercept British bombers effectively. The Junkers Ju-88 embodied this doctrine perfectly. 300 miles per hour maximum speed, crew of 4 with dedicated roles. Fuji 220 Liechtenstein radar for target acquisition. Twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower. Armored cockpit protecting against ground fire. Between 1940 and 1942, Ju-88 night fighters destroyed 357 British bombers. German confidence wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics validated by victory. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant. On February 4, 1943, she flew against a Wehrmacht supply depot near Tikhoretsk. Her Po-2 had no radio. She communicated with her navigator, Lieutenant Galia Dokutovich, by tapping shoulders and pointing. They carried no parachutes because jumping from 400 meters meant death regardless. The wooden aircraft cruised at 94 miles per hour, precisely half the German minimum engagement speed. She navigated by compass and landmark recognition, spotted targets by moonlight, calculated bomb release through practiced instinct. The mission succeeded. German supply records noted spontaneous fires of unknown origin, destroying 8 tons of artillery shells. This was mission 206 of what would eventually become 852. Luftwaffe intelligence categorized the attack as probable partisan sabotage, because accepting that women in wooden crop dusters could penetrate their defenses violated every principle their doctrine established. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established. The POWs construction was flying kindling, wood frame wrapped in canvas fabric treated with paint and lacquer, earning nicknames like plywood with wings among Soviet mechanics. The open cockpit exposed pilots to -40 degrees Celsius, resulting in documented cases of severe frostbite requiring finger amputations. Breath formed ice on goggles and eyelashes. Pilots flew with no equipment whatsoever. No radios because the M11 engine generated too much vibration for vacuum tubes. No parachutes because low-altitude operations made them pointless. No armor plating because the wooden airframe couldn't support additional weight. The specifications comparison read like a deliberate joke. Speed, 94 miles per hour maximum versus the Ju-88's 300. Power, 100 horsepower M11 radial engine versus the Ju-88's 2,400 horsepower. Age, designed in 1928, making the aircraft literally older than most pilots flying them. Cost, $5,000 to manufacture versus $80,000 for a Ju-88. Production time, 3 weeks from raw lumber to operational aircraft versus 3 months for German fighters. The absurdity was complete. Women flying wooden training biplanes converted to bombers, hand-dropping explosives over the side because the aircraft lacked bomb bays. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into advantages. The POW-2's simplicity meant 4-minute refueling and 3-minute bomb reloading, enabling 8 to 14 sorties per night, while German bombers managed 2. On the night of March 15, 1943, Popova flew 13 missions, each lasting approximately 40 minutes from takeoff to landing. The rapid turnaround was impossible for German aircraft, requiring extended maintenance checks between flights. The canvas and wood construction that seemed suicidal actually created an unexpected benefit. Bullets passed through fabric without triggering the catastrophic explosive decompression that metal aircraft suffered. Popova's personal PO-2 once returned with 24 bullet holes, none striking critical systems because there were almost no critical systems to strike. "If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins," she later told her squadron, "that bullet would have ricocheted around the cockpit until it found me. The Germans designed aircraft to fight their war. We designed tactics to fight ours." The tons of bombs her regiment dropped, that 23-ton figure German POWs would later report with disbelief, accumulated not despite the PO-2's limitations, but because of them. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from March 20, 1943 concluded, "Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents desperate measure indicating severe pilot shortage and declining manufacturing capacity. Wooden construction, primitive equipment, absence of basic safety systems render these operations extremely vulnerable to organized opposition. Physics remains immutable. Speed, armor, modern avionics always defeat slow, unprotected, obsolete platforms. Current operations predicted to cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. Mathematical analysis demonstrates insurmountable advantages. 3.2 to 1 speed ratio, 24 to 1 horsepower differential, 15 to 1 cost efficiency for replacement aircraft. Assessment: temporary morale impact only through sleep disruption of forward personnel. No serious operational threat to supply infrastructure or tactical positions. Recommendation: monitor situation but do not prioritize development of specialized countermeasures. Standard night fighter protocols sufficient once properly deployed. This assessment carried the full authority of the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. During the period that assessment was being written, she flew against an ammunition train near Kushchevskaya on March 18th. Direct hit. 60 tons of artillery shells detonated in sequence, the explosion visible from 20 kilometers. On March 22nd, she destroyed a fuel depot at Tikhoretsk. 200,000 liters burned. March 24th, a supply convoy near Slavyansk. By this point, she had conducted 307 missions, rapidly approaching the 852 that would eventually make her one of the most decorated Soviet pilots. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses that contradicted assessment predictions. The math didn't work. The assessment said these operations should be ceasing. Instead, the tonnage increased. That figure, 23 tons dropped collectively in single nights by 40 women, appeared in multiple after-action reports, each time dismissed as exaggeration or misattribution, because accepting it meant accepting that German air superiority was an illusion. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their logic seemed sound. Ju-88 at 300 miles per hour versus PO2 at 94 miles per hour equals 3.2 times speed advantage, therefore easy interception and destruction. But interception requires matching speed, not merely exceeding it. What they critically overlooked was the aerodynamic paradox of stall speeds. The Ju-88 stalled at approximately 120 miles per hour. Below that threshold, airflow over wings became insufficient to generate lift, and the aircraft dropped from the sky. The PO2 operated comfortably at 80 miles per hour and could glide with engine off at 60. The Soviet biplanes flew below German minimum survivable speed. This created an impossible scenario. German pilots must either fly past their targets too fast to establish firing solutions, or slow down to engagement speed and risk catastrophic stall. No middle ground existed. On September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad, Hauptmann Werner Schmidt attempted interception of a PO2. He reduced speed to 130 miles per hour. The Soviet pilot immediately throttled back to 70 miles per hour glide. Schmidt's aircraft displayed stall warnings, shaking controls, nose dropping. He applied full power and aborted. His report stated, "Target speed below minimum engagement threshold. Successful interception not possible without stall risk." Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable. During her 13th mission on that record night of March 15th, she detected a Bf-110 approaching from 6,000 meters. She immediately throttled to minimum power and descended to 300 meters. The German made 4 passes, overshooting each time, unable to match her speed without dropping from the sky. On his final attempt, his aircraft's wings visibly wobbled, the physical warning of approaching stall. He chose not to crash and abandoned pursuit. This tactic, repeated across her 852 missions, proved the PO2's slowness was its greatest weapon. German pilots reported the same frustration mission after mission. They could see targets, approach targets, even fire at targets, but establishing sustained engagement required slowing to speeds their aircraft couldn't survive. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed, and Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. The physics problem extended beyond simple inability to match speeds. German fighters were optimized for intercepting fast Soviet bombers, Ilyushin Il-4s, and Petlikov P-2s, traveling at 250 miles per hour or faster. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 were designed to chase, close distance rapidly, and destroy before targets reached German lines. Every aspect of their engineering assumed pursuit of fast-moving aircraft, but physics remains merciless. An aircraft must maintain minimum speed or fall from the sky. At 300 miles per hour cruising speed, overshooting a 90-mile-per-hour target was inevitable. Slowing to 150 miles per hour brought pilots dangerously close to the 120-mile-per-hour stall threshold. The Po-2 operating at 80 miles per hour, capable of gliding at 60 with engines idled, existed in an untouchable zone. German pilots trained extensively for pursuit interception, but received no instruction in precision slow-speed engagement because their doctrine never anticipated such scenarios. At high-speed approach, Target acquisition lasted approximately 2 to 3 seconds. With a differential of 200 miles per hour or more, establishing weapons lock proved impossible. The aircraft simply moved too fast to aim. On April 7, 1943, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage on her 341st mission. Her target was a Wehrmacht motorized column near Krimsk. At 400 meters altitude, she detected a Bf-110 by the distinctive growl of its twin engines. She immediately throttled her PO-2 to minimum power, dropping to 70 miles per hour. The German fighter made 4 passes. Each time it screamed past so fast, the wake turbulence rocked her aircraft. The pilot's frustration became visible. Steep banking turns trying to circle back, wings wobbling as he attempted tighter maneuvers. Each pass gave Popova time to adjust her course slightly toward the target. She completed her bombing run while the German burned fuel in increasingly desperate intercept attempts. By this point, mission 341 of her eventual 852, she'd perfected the counterintuitive response to fighter contact. Slow down further. The paradox defeated German pilots psychologically as much as physically. Their training insisted speed equals survival. She proved the opposite. The German reported target evasion successful through unconventional maneuvering. The motorized column reported 3 trucks destroyed, 17 casualties. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO-2's greatest vulnerability, its construction from materials belonging in furniture, not aircraft. The physics of bullet impact depends entirely on target composition. When bullets struck metal aircraft, they penetrated aluminum skin, created shrapnel from the fragmented metal, then ricocheted inside the fuselage at unpredictable angles, severing fuel lines, puncturing hydraulic systems, killing crew members. German ammunition was designed specifically for metal targets, explosive rounds that detonated on impact with hard surfaces, incendiary tracers that ignited fuel vapor. Armor-piercing rounds wasted tremendous energy penetrating armor that canvas aircraft didn't possess. In contrast, when bullets struck canvas aircraft, they passed clean through fabric, exited, transferred minimal energy, created no shrapnel, caused no secondary damage. Unless the bullet directly struck the wooden structural spars, which occupied perhaps 5% of the aircraft's surface area, it simply made a hole. The vital systems, engine, fuel tank, crew, occupied a similarly small percentage of total aircraft volume. Canvas tears didn't significantly affect aerodynamics. A fabric wing with 20 holes flew nearly identically to an intact wing. Repairs required 30 minutes with canvas patches and lacquer versus hours of metal welding. German pilots repeatedly reported hitting targets without achieving kills, filing frustrated reports stating, "Bullets observed passing through without effect." During her mission on April 23, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively. Her 368th mission targeted German artillery positions near Novorossiysk. Anti-aircraft fire caught her aircraft at low altitude. Post-flight inspection revealed 42 bullet holes. 27 holes perforated the upper wing alone, creating a pattern like moths had attacked the canvas. The fuselage showed 15 entry and exit holes. One bullet passed through the cockpit space between Popova and her navigator, Lieutenant Katya Ryabova, close enough that both women felt the displaced air. It entered through canvas beside Popova's right shoulder, exited beside Ryabova's left knee, hit nothing solid. Ground crews stood silently examining the damage. In a metal aircraft, the ricochets would have killed both women. Instead, maintenance crews patched the holes and declared the aircraft airworthy. Popova flew 2 more missions that night in the same damaged PO-2, adding another 11 holes by dawn. This aircraft, bearing scars like battle honors, would carry her through 73 additional missions before accumulated damage finally forced retirement. "In their metal planes, I would be dead 10 times over," she told her squadron. Canvas forgives. Metal remembers every bullet until one finds flesh. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale, transforming harassment into psychological warfare. German searchlight and anti-aircraft systems relied fundamentally on acoustic detection. Sound-ranging equipment triangulated engine noise to calculate aircraft position and altitude for targeting. Standard defensive procedure followed predictable sequence. Acoustic sensors detected engine noise. Operators activated searchlights to illuminate predicted position. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire at illuminated targets. Fighters were scrambled to intercept survivors. The system worked effectively against conventional bombers. The Night Witches discovered a tactic that rendered this entire defensive infrastructure useless. The approach pattern developed through trial and experience, possibly beginning as accident when an engine failed during attack run. They refined it into deliberate doctrine. First, approach the target at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle. Germans heard the approaching aircraft, prepared their defenses, tracked the engine noise. Second, at 3,000 feet altitude, idle engines completely. The aircraft continued forward in total silence, gliding. Third, maintain silent glide for 5 to 6 minutes, adjusting approach by manipulating control surfaces. Fourth, release bombs over target before Germans realized aircraft were directly overhead. Fifth, restart engines only after bombs exploded, when detection became irrelevant. The physics made it possible. The PO2's glide ratio approximated 1 to 10, losing 1 foot of altitude per 10 feet of forward travel. From 3,000 feet, the aircraft could glide 30,000 feet, 5.6 miles. At 60 miles per hour glide speed, that distance required 5.6 minutes. The only sound was wind through canvas wings, a soft rustling completely unlike engine roar, often mistaken for wind itself. The psychological effect was profound. Germans heard nothing, saw nothing. Then explosions erupted around them. On the night of March 15, 1943, Nadezhda Popova used the silent approach 18 times, setting her personal single-night record that would later shock German prisoners when they learned one woman flew that many missions. On her 7th sortie, she targeted a German command post 3 kilometers behind the front lines near Krimskaya. She approached with engines audible. Below, Germans activated searchlights, scanning the sky along her projected path. At 2,800 feet, she cut the engine. The M11 radial sputtered to silence. Her PO2 glided like a wooden ghost. She descended in complete quiet, directly over German positions. Through gaps in clouds, moonlight illuminated faces below, soldiers calling to each other. "Wo sind die Flugzeuge? Where are the aircraft?" Searchlight beams swept empty sky 300 meters from her actual position. She released 2 50-kilogram bombs directly onto the command post from 400 meters. The explosions illuminated German faces looking up at nothing, confusion transforming to terror as they realized the aircraft had been overhead all along. She restarted the engine only after clearing the target area, the sudden mechanical roar serving as her signature. She would repeat this silent approach on 11 of her 18 missions that night. Those 23 tons her regiment dropped collectively, the figure that would later appear in incredulous German POW testimonies, accumulated partly through this ghost tactic. "We were not pilots to them," she said later. "We were nightmares they couldn't fight. They feared the silence more than the bombs because silence meant we could be anywhere." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The Ju-88 impressed with specifications: 300 miles per hour maximum speed, 2,400 horsepower twin engines, FUG 2-on-20 radar, radio communications, armor protection, heated cockpit, crew of 4 with specialized roles. The aircraft cost $80,000 and required 3 months to manufacture, demanding skilled labor, precision machining, complex assembly of thousands of components. But operational tempo revealed the hidden costs of sophistication. Ju-88 night fighters managed 1 to 2 sorties per night maximum. Between missions, maintenance crews required 3 to 4 hours for mandatory systems checks, refueling, rearming, and crew rest protocols. 4 men coordinating in high-stress darkness, managing radar equipment, navigating by instruments, communicating via radio. The cognitive load was immense. Crew fatigue became operational constraint. The average Ju-88 night fighter career lasted 40 to 60 missions before loss or mandatory crew rotation. Survival rates hovered around 60%, with losses attributed not primarily to combat but to weather, navigation errors, mechanical failures. The complexity that made them formidable also made them fragile. The PO-2 existed at the opposite extreme. Specifications appeared primitive. 94 miles per hour, maximum speed, 100 horsepower single engine, no radar, no radios, no armor, no enclosed cockpit, crew of 2. The aircraft cost $5,000 and required 3 weeks to build from lumber and canvas. Minimal skilled labor, simple construction, few components to fail. Yet operational tempo told the true story. Night Witches flew 8 to 18 sorties per night. Maintenance between missions required 7 minutes total, 4 minutes refueling, 3 minutes reloading bombs. Ground crews could prepare aircraft faster than pilots could walk from debriefing back to cockpit. Crew coordination simplified to 2 women who'd flown together hundreds of times, communicating by taps and gestures. No complex systems to manage. The average Night Witch flew 800 to 1,000 missions during her career. Survival rates reached 96.8%, with losses almost entirely from ground fire, rarely from fighter interception. The paradox became undeniable. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft delivered lower operational effectiveness. Simpler, cheaper aircraft delivered higher operational effectiveness. German technological advantage became logistical disadvantage. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record. That night of March 15, 1943, demonstrated what sustained operational tempo actually meant. She started flying at 2200 hours, completed her 18th mission at 0530 hours, 7.5 hours, 18 complete combat cycles. Each cycle averaged 25 minutes, 12 minutes flight to target, 3 minutes bombing run, 12 minutes return flight, 7 minutes on ground for refueling and reloading. Ground crew efficiency meant mechanics prepared her aircraft faster than she could walk from brief debriefing to cockpit. Total bombs dropped that night, approximately 900 kilograms across 18 sorties. German positions hit included 2 ammunition dumps, 1 vehicle park, 1 command post, 3 mortar positions, 2 communication trenches, 1 field hospital, 8 general harassment bombing runs on troop concentrations. German casualty estimates exceeded 200 killed or wounded. For comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe pilot flew maximum 4 sorties in one night, considered exceptional performance. By this point in the war, Popova's accumulating mission count was becoming legendary, even among German soldiers who fought in darkness, hearing the sporadic drone of her engines announcing another approach. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in their resource allocation reports. German expenditure attempting to stop the Night Witches specifically had grown to absurd proportions. Anti-aircraft batteries fired more than 2 million rounds at Night Witches throughout 1942 and 1943. At 50 Reichsmarks per AA shell, that totaled 100 million Reichsmarks, roughly $40 million in ammunition alone. Fighter sorties dedicated to intercepting Night Witches exceeded 1,000 attempts. At 500 Reichsmarks operational cost per sortie accounting for fuel, ammunition, maintenance, and crew time, that represented another 500,000 Reichsmarks. Searchlight batteries totaling more than 200 units were deployed specifically for night harassment defense. Personnel assignments reached 5,000 soldiers dedicated to countering nocturnal Soviet raids. When logistics officers calculated total German cost, the figure exceeded 50 million Reichsmarks invested in stopping 40 women flying obsolete biplanes. The Soviet investment in the 588th Regiment appeared in stark contrast. 40 PO-2 aircraft at $5,000 each equaled $200,000. Ammunition costs, simple fragmentation bombs, represented a fraction of what Germans spent defending against them. Personnel totaled 80 pilots and navigators, plus minimal ground crews, approximately 150 people total. Total Soviet investment in creating and sustaining the entire regiment remained under $2 million. The cost ratio was brutal. Germans were spending 25 rubles for every 1 ruble Soviets spent, achieving 0 confirmed kills. Perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in microcosm. If German anti-aircraft batteries fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her per mission, which intelligence assessments suggested was conservative. Then her 852 missions meant Germans fired approximately 852,000 rounds at her specifically. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, that totaled 42.6 million Reichsmarks spent trying to kill one woman. Result: she survived all 852 missions. Meanwhile, her bombs destroyed tons of ammunition, dozens of vehicles, hundreds of German personnel, countless infrastructure targets. Conservative estimates place the value of German material destroyed by her personal actions at over 80 million Reichsmarks. The comparison seemed impossible, yet the mathematics were undeniable. The average USAF bomber crew rotated home after completing 25 missions, considered a full tour of duty. Nadezhda Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty without rotation. She represented more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters flew collectively. Her 852 missions made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal, measured purely by resources expended versus damage inflicted. German High Command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets, and Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German High Command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation that would force complete reassessment of the Soviet night harassment campaign. November 9, 1942, near Maikop. A PO-2 crashed after ground fire severed fuel lines during low-altitude attack run. The aircraft struck Earth at shallow angle, broke apart, but didn't burn. Wehrmacht recovery team arrived expecting to find bodies of young Soviet men, perhaps undertrained replacements explaining the primitive equipment. They found Lieutenant Yevgenia Zhigolenko, age 21, dead from impact trauma. When soldiers removed her leather flight helmet, long dark hair fell across her shoulders. The team stood silent. One soldier insisted this must be isolated incident. Perhaps a ferry pilot caught in wrong place. Perhaps propaganda officer gathering material. Then they searched the wreckage, found her logbook, leather-bound, meticulous, 312 missions recorded across 6 months. Each entry included date, target, ordnance dropped, result. The handwriting was precise, professional. Found her identification papers. Found commendation citation signed by regimental commander. Found navigation charts marked with her planning. 7 days later, second PO-2 shot down 40 kilometers east. Another female pilot. Her logbook showed 297 missions. Intelligence officers could no longer dismiss this as anomaly. The report reached battalion commander first, who marked it urgent and forwarded to division with annotation. Requires immediate verification. Multiple sources confirming. Division sent it to Corps with added intelligence summaries from 3 separate sectors reporting similar findings. Corps escalated to Army Group, where staff officers cross-referenced captured documents, prisoner interrogations, and aircraft serial numbers appearing in raid reports over months. Wehrmacht intelligence confirmed existence of 588th Night Bomber Regiment, designated female personnel, operational since May 1942. On November 28, 1942, General Lieutenant Klaus Hoffmann presented findings to assembled senior officers at Army Group South Headquarters in Taganrog. He distributed captured photographs, prisoner testimonies, and translated Soviet commendation orders. The room of experienced commanders confronted incontrovertible evidence. Intelligence had tracked specific aircraft serial numbers appearing in raid reports across 8 months. Cross-referenced Night Witch attack patterns with documented personnel, verified through multiple independent sources. The conclusion was unavoidable and humiliating. Women were responsible for the harassment that had cost millions of Reichsmarks, thousands of casualties, and countless sleepless nights. The revelation created crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that transcended tactical concerns. Initial disbelief persisted among officers who'd spent careers in military hierarchies where women served as nurses or clerks, never combat pilots. Many demanded additional verification, suggesting elaborate Soviet deception. But evidence accumulated relentlessly. The humiliation cut deeper than operational failure. Elite Luftwaffe pilots, graduates of rigorous training programs, veterans of campaigns across Europe, had been systematically beaten by women flying crop dusters. The propaganda problem seemed insurmountable. How could they explain this to German public already fed constant assurances of racial and military superiority? Ideological conflict compounded practical concerns. Nazi doctrine explicitly defined women's roles as mothers and homemakers, creating fundamental cognitive dissonance when confronted with female combat pilots flying more missions than German aces. If women could do this, what else had German assumptions gotten catastrophically wrong? Specific reactions varied by rank and personality. Luftwaffe pilots quietly requested transfers rather than admit being outmaneuvered by female adversaries. Some officers insisted official reports refer only to Soviet night harassment units without gender specification. Luftwaffe High Command actively suppressed information, classifying details beyond routine distribution, fearing morale impact across Wehrmacht forces. Frontline soldiers reacted differently, grudging respect mixed with superstitious fear. The nickname Nachthexen spread rapidly among troops despite official discouragement. Some German units formally requested dedicated anti-night witch resources. Others refused to acknowledge gender in any communication, focusing exclusively on tactical threat. Operational Order 4427, dated December 3, 1942, stated, "All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender characteristics." This directive issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale and operational effectiveness. The order itself confirmed what it attempted to suppress. The discovery had shaken German confidence at fundamental level. While German command struggled with revelation, Nadezhda Popova was flying her 441st mission. Completely unaware Germans had just learned her identity. She knew nothing of crashed comrades, interrogated prisoners, or Wehrmacht intelligence briefings. Her perspective remained ruthlessly practical. Germans discovering her gender was irrelevant to her mission. By the time Germans confirmed her regiment's composition, she had already completed over 400 of her eventual 852 missions. On November 28, 1942, the same day General Lieutenant Hoffmann briefed senior officers, Popova attacked Wehrmacht's supply depot near Kushchevskaya. She destroyed 2 ammunition trucks and damaged fuel storage facility. German logistics recorded unexplained fires consistent with night harassment pattern. She returned safely, refueled, flew again. "We didn't fly to prove women could fight," she told her squadron later. "We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs." The discovery changed nothing operationally. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners during occupation period of 1945 through 1946. Interrogators routinely asked about Eastern Front experiences, particularly regarding night operations. When questioning specifically addressed night witches, unexpected consistency emerged across hundreds of interviews. Even hardened SS officers showed visible reactions to the topic, some embarrassment, some grudging acknowledgement, some lingering disbelief. Pattern emerged suggesting the night witches had achieved psychological impact, far exceeding their physical destructive capacity, creating legend that persisted beyond military defeat. Oberleutnant Heinrich Rossbach, Ju-88 night fighter pilot from NJG-4, captured May 1945 near Prague, testified, "We received intercept orders beginning winter 1942-1943. Command provided no briefing about pilot gender. We learned only after surrender when Soviet officers interrogated us. I attempted interception 23 times across 14 months. 23 failures. Every attempt ended identically. I would close on target, reduce speed for engagement, immediately receive stall warnings. My aircraft would not fly slowly enough to maintain firing position. Training emphasized speed as survival. Slow aircraft die. These Soviet aircraft operated below our minimum survivable speed. It was professionally humiliating. You master Ju-88 systems. You face British heavy bombers. You understand aerial combat doctrine. Then wooden biplanes make you appear incompetent. When I learned they were women after surrender, I had no response. We couldn't intercept them because physics prevented it. Gender proved irrelevant. They had exploited aerodynamic principles our engineers never considered. Hauptmann Walter Brandt, Flak Battery Commander stationed Eastern Ukraine Sector, captured March 1945. My battery expended approximately 48,000 rounds at these aircraft between August 1942 and September 1943. We achieved perhaps 5 confirmed hits total. Standard engagement pattern became predictable torture. They approached with engines audible. We tracked sound, prepared firing solutions, activated searchlights. Then silence. Complete silence. We fired at estimated positions, essentially shooting at darkness. Engine noise returned only after bombs exploded, usually behind our positions by then. Psychological effect on crews was devastating. Men developed nervous conditions from constant nocturnal alerts producing no visible enemy. We feared silence more than explosions because silence meant they were overhead and we were blind. Learning post-war they were female personnel added dimension I still cannot fully articulate. It confirmed we had fundamentally misunderstood this enemy. Common themes emerged across testimonies without explicit coordination. Nearly all mentioned silence and its psychological impact. Repeated descriptions of failed interceptions attributable to speed differential appeared in fighter pilot accounts. Almost universal shock manifested upon learning gender composition of 588th Regiment. Many attempted rationalization, suggesting Soviet propaganda exaggerated female involvement or misrepresented support personnel as combat pilots. Others admitted directly. Gender made no operational difference. They were effective regardless. The phrase, "couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed," appeared in variant forms across dozens of interviews. Several mentioned specific night witches by reputation or aircraft markings, though rarely knowing actual names. Most significantly, testimonies acknowledged that Wehrmacht propaganda about Soviet inferiority had been catastrophically wrong, at least regarding this particular regiment. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without knowing her name until post-war records made identification possible. Lieutenant Franz Dietrich, infantry officer stationed near Krasnodar, captured February 1945, testified, "One aircraft we learned to recognize through distinctive pattern of canvas patches covering bullet holes across both wings. Mechanics in our sector joked it looked like grandmother's quilt. This aircraft appeared over our positions approximately every third night for months. We designated it the Ghost because it invariably arrived in complete silence, attacked, departed before we could respond effectively. I personally witnessed this aircraft's attacks 14 times. On March 18, 1943, it destroyed our ammunition depot. 60 tons of artillery shells detonated sequentially. On April 7th, same aircraft hit our mobile command post, killing 4 officers, including battalion commander. After surrender, Soviet records indicated this was likely Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova. She had flown over 800 missions, including nights when her regiment collectively dropped 23 tons of ordnance. We never came remotely close to shooting her down. She was effectively untouchable given our defensive capabilities. Popova remained unaware for years that German prisoners spoke her name in interrogation rooms, that Wehrmacht intelligence files contained assessments of her tactics, that frontline soldiers recognized her aircraft by its patchwork of repairs. She knew Germans were being captured, knew Soviet interrogators gathered intelligence, but her focus remained forward. Next mission, next target. Her mission count continued rising through war's final years. By May 1945, she had completed 852 combat sorties, making her among the most prolific combat pilots of any nation. Her reflection years later, recorded in post-war interview, "We did what required doing. Whether they respected us or feared us or felt humiliated by us was their concern, not ours. Our concern was victory. We achieved it." The testimonies confirmed what Germans discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda constructs. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front. And Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible 3 years earlier. She had completed 852 combat missions, more than any German night fighter pilot would fly in their entire career. more than most bomber crews would survive. Across those missions, she accumulated approximately 1,700 flight hours in darkness, navigating by compass and stars through weather that grounded conventional aircraft. She personally dropped over 170 tons of high explosive and fragmentation bombs on German positions. From May 1942 through May 1945, she averaged 28 missions per month, without interruption, flying through Russian winters that froze exposed skin in seconds and summers when engine heat in open cockpit reached unbearable temperatures. She survived without being shot down even once, though her aircraft returned riddled with bullet holes on dozens of occasions. The Soviet Union awarded her Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor, plus Order of the Red Banner, Order of the Red Star, and multiple campaign medals. The human cost of those 852 missions defied calculation. Permanent hearing damage from sitting 3 feet behind an unmuffled radial engine for 1,700 hours. Frostbite scars across her hands and face from -40-degree cockpit exposure. The psychological weight of knowing that each mission could be the last, yet climbing back into that wooden cockpit night after night after night. The regiment lost 32 women killed during the war, friends and comrades Popova watched die. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters profoundly. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots flew 40 to 60 missions before rotation, injury, or death. The United States Army Air Forces rotated bomber crews home after completing 25 missions, considered a full tour of duty requiring extraordinary luck and skill to survive. Nadezhda Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours without rotation. The average Soviet male bomber pilot who survived the war flew 150 to 300 missions. Even within the 588th Regiment, where the average pilot completed 500 to 600 missions, Popova exceeded her peers by 40%. Her 852 missions represented more combat sorties than entire bomber groups in other air forces flew collectively. If each mission averaged 2 hours from pre-flight to post-landing, she spent 71 continuous days airborne in 3 years. If each mission dropped an average of 200 kilograms of ordnance, she personally delivered 170 metric tons of explosives onto German positions. Conservative estimates suggest her missions directly caused 800 to 1,000 German casualties and destroyed material worth millions of Reichsmarks. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to form all-female combat units despite institutional resistance. The 40 women who flew combat missions for the regiment completed approximately 23,000 combat sorties across 3 years of continuous operations. They collectively dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions, targets, and supply lines. German military records and post-war analysis estimated the regiment inflicted 5,000 to 8,000 casualties, killed or wounded. Material destruction included hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, countless installations, supply depots, and communication facilities. Operating from May 1942 through May 9, 1945, the regiment maintained operational tempo unmatched by conventional Soviet bomber units. The regiment lost 32 personnel killed from approximately 80 pilots and navigators who served during the war, achieving a 96.8% survival rate. Conventional Soviet bomber units suffered 40 to 60% losses. The cost-effectiveness proved staggering. The entire regiment cost approximately $2 million to equip and maintain, yet inflicted damage German military historians estimated exceeded $50 million in destroyed material and diverted resources. German expenditure attempting to counter the Night Witches exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks. The cost ratio approached 1 to 60. Soviets spent 1 ruble. Germans spent 60 to counter it. German fighters achieved 0 confirmed aerial kills of Night Witches. Almost all regiment losses resulted from ground fire, not air combat, validating the stall speed paradox that made them effectively immune to fighter interception. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the Night Witches provided. The psychological warfare component degraded German morale across entire sectors. Sleep deprivation from nightly harassment raids reduced combat effectiveness of frontline units measurably. German commanders diverted over 5,000 soldiers to air defense duties who could have been fighting elsewhere. Supply lines required longer, more vulnerable routes to avoid known night witch patrol areas. The propaganda value proved immeasurable. Proof that Soviet women could fight effectively boosted civilian morale and validated women's participation in total war effort. The exposed German miscalculation revealed fundamental flaws in Wehrmacht intelligence assessment and operational doctrine. The regiment demonstrated asymmetric warfare principles that military strategists would study for decades, minimal investment producing maximum enemy disruption. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The night witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions embodied this principle completely. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to a world where nightly combat no longer structured existence. Initial recognition came immediately. Hero of the Soviet Union designation, victory parades through Moscow, speeches to workers and students about the Great Patriotic War. But transitioning from 3 years of nightly missions to civilian routine proved difficult for many combat veterans. Popova continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor and later working in civil aviation administration. She married a fellow pilot and had 2 children. She maintained close relationships with surviving squadron mates, attending annual reunions where the dwindling number of night witches shared memories and honored the dead. She spoke about her experiences when requested, but never dwelt on the horror, focusing instead on the necessity of what they'd done and the competence they demonstrated. Soviet recognition fluctuated with political climate. Stalin's regime sometimes suppressed war heroes who gained too much independent fame, but Popova's multiple decorations remained official record. She received additional honors during later Soviet periods and into post-Soviet Russia, including having schools and streets named after her. She lived until 2013, dying at age 91, one of the last surviving night witches. For decades, the night witches remained virtually unknown in the West, dismissed during Cold War years as Soviet propaganda or exaggeration. Western historians, initially skeptical that women flew combat missions in wooden biplanes, assumed Soviet claims were ideological fabrications. The story began emerging during Glasnost in the 1980s when Soviet archives opened partially and veterans could speak more freely. During the 1990s and 2000s, historians gained access to Wehrmacht archives and discovered German records, prisoner testimonies, and intelligence reports that validated Soviet accounts completely. Books and documentaries began bringing the story to Western audiences who realized this wasn't propaganda but meticulously documented history. Modern recognition expanded significantly. The Russian Air Force Museum features extensive exhibits on the 588th Regiment. Monuments and memorials honor them in Russia and Ukraine. Schools bear their names. Films, books, and documentaries continue telling their story to new generations. Nadezhda Popova specifically received recognition as one of the most decorated and accomplished pilots, her 852 missions cited as among the highest combat sortie counts in aviation history. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons applicable beyond World War II. About warfare, it demonstrated that asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority when employed with skill and determination. Psychological impact sometimes matters more than physical damage. German troops feared the silence before bombs as much as explosions themselves. Innovation matters more than resources. The silent gliding tactic cost nothing but changed everything. Underestimating any enemy based on preconceptions creates fatal vulnerabilities. About prejudice, the story reveals how German assumptions about gender and aircraft primitiveness blinded them to genuine threat. The enemy's apparent weakness, slow speed, canvas construction, female pilots, proved to be precisely their strength. Physics and engineering showed that sometimes simple design beats complex. canvas that bullets passed through harmlessly versus metal that created lethal shrapnel. Understanding your operational environment mattered more than specifications. The stall speed paradox defeated German fighters more effectively than armor or weapons. About human resilience, flying 852 missions required extraordinary determination. Each mission could have been her last, yet Popova continued night after night. The physical and psychological toll was immense, yet she and her sisters persisted because the alternative was surrender. The German officers who gathered in that briefing room on March 8, 1943, laughing at women flying crop dusters, never understood what Nadezhda Popova and her 40 sisters were about to prove. They calculated speed and horsepower and radar capabilities. They measured armor thickness and engine displacement and weapons payload. They analyzed every variable except the ones that mattered. That courage doesn't require the best equipment, that skill can overcome raw power, that determination makes physics itself negotiable. Her 852 missions weren't just numbers in a logbook. They were proof that the Germans calculated everything except the one variable that mattered most, which was the will to fight against impossible odds. In wooden biplanes that cost $5,000 and shouldn't have survived, against an enemy armed with $80,000 fighters who refused to take them seriously until too late, 40 women dropped 23 tons of bombs in single nights and proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the most powerful one. It's the one your enemy never sees coming.